A good society should have law. There's no such thing as a lawless good society. But what is the law? So what's the pathway to a good society? We've talked a lot on this kitchen table about education over the past few months, but surely law is also essential. But how do we use it? What's it supposed to be based on? Who makes the law?
Yeah, Steve, for me, this is a huge question. I speak a lot to lawyers. I'm not sure if you've got lawyers in Perth, but we have quite a lot of lawyers here in Sydney. And, we talk about what the law is based on. People just assume that that's the case. So I thought I would go to the Law Society of New South Wales. And they have this very chirpy student or presenter or whatever who gives us a definition of the law. And here's a little part of it.
What is the rule of law? Like democracy or equality, the rule of law is a popular but vague term. It's kind of one of those terms that lawyers and politicians use so much, it's almost become meaningless. Kind of like when you use a swear word so often that you no longer find it offensive. Today, we're going to try and demystify this term so you can all bring it back into your vocabularies without sounding like boffins. So, what is the rule of law? For answers, we turn to the super reliable, go-to source that got even the best lawyers through law school, the internet. According to numerous reputable websites, the rule of law is the legal principle that law should govern a nation and its citizens, as opposed to the power resting with a few untouchable individuals, like politicians or royals. It comes with a bunch of concepts like the law should be clear, known and enforced. The courts need to be independent to government and resolve disputes fairly. People are presumed innocent until proven otherwise by a court. Police can't arrest or detain you without good reason. Every citizen is equal under the law, whether they are a king or a lowly first-year law clerk. This rule of law concept has a long history dating back thousands of years. The ancient Greeks established democratic law courts back in the 4th and 5th centuries BC, with juries that could have hundreds of members. Sure, their punishments might have been a little different to modern-day sentences, but the concept was there.
So yes, that was an interesting and quite informative for me. The role of the law. It talks about the rule of law. What does that involve? As she's unpacking that, it's quite. It goes back in time.
It goes back in time, but it was fascinating because she talks about things like presumption of innocence, equality under the law, which is the one I'm really interested in. That it must be clear, and I'm going, you're joking. Why would we employ lawyers? I mean, if it's clear, the whole point about the law being obscure is that all these lawyers get massive amounts of money to explain this very clear law to us. Independent courts, that's an interesting one and a very important thing. And I liked the idea that law is both for the nation and for its leaders. Although I did have some problems, but let's see if you can guess what they were.
Well, I'm going to say that connecting law to something that seems a little bit more sort of vague is part of the issue. It says in that video that law respects fundamental human rights. What's the problem with that statement itself?
Well, that came from Michael Kirby, which he said something very, very interesting. I was at a talk where he spoke, and he admitted at that talk that lawyers are biased. People like him are biased. A Supreme Court judge are biased. And he makes a very interesting distinction between the rule of law and the law of rules. And it seems to me that in dictatorships, you have the law of rules. But the problem with fundamental human rights is, who says what are they? What's a fundamental human right? I mean, is it my fundamental human right, for example, to be as handsome and colourful as you?
It's your
is that
right.
A basic...
Whether you're meeting that right, I'm not quite sure.
Well, it's my right. I demand it. I mean, or a fundamental human right. Are you ever going to be allowed to leave Perth? Or don't we consider people in Perth to be fully human?
Yes. Well, I mean, there is that. But I get that rubberiness of the law. being the laws here, it's hard and it's firm, but here's human rights and how do those things work. The term equality, what does it mean to be equal under the law? Some of that was raised in the video as well, in reference to royalty taking advantage of laws that other people are subject to.
Yeah, I think equality under the law is very hard both to define and to practice, but fundamentally it should mean that you have no advantage. Now, I think that's difficult because if you've got a lot of money, you can employ a better lawyer, for example. So you have a very large case at the moment in where a mining industry tycoon is taking the whole Western Australian government to court. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that, and I wouldn't be able to do that. Clive Palmer, we wouldn't have the money to do that. So, but I think equality under the law is a fundamental of Western liberal democracies, and my fear is we're going to actually lose that.
Well, let's bring it to Christianity, because I'm going to suggest that, and this is what you would suggest, that the modern liberal democracy is born out of a Christian framework. And the Bible itself has a lot to say about law. It's not just a book of rules, but it's got a lot about law in it. What do you think that Christianity in particular has to offer in the area of law?
Well, I would encourage people to watch the whole of that video. It's only 6 minutes. We've only shown a bit of it. But for the Law Society of New South Wales to be so ignorant about the history of law is really quite depressing. And I'm going to use the word ignorance because they seem to think that law, well, the ancient Greeks had a bit to do with it, although they're a bit over the top with punishment. After that, it's Magna Carta in 1215, and everything stems from that. But it's really moderns. And we even had one character on there saying that law had nothing to do. We didn't really know what law was until recently. It's only after Magna Carta and so on. I'm going, they haven't read the Bible because it's full of concepts of law and the king being subject to the law. So you have an idea of lex rex, the law is king, or rex lex, the king is the law. And it's in Christianity, it's fundamental that law stems from God. And I think if you're going to have fundamental human rights based on fundamental law, you need an absolute lawgiver, and that should be God. And that's why I think the basis is there. And for me, that's a really important issue.
So what that's meaning is that unless there's something above the lawyer, unless there's a lawgiver external to us, you're going to run into all sorts of problems. And the Bible seems to address that issue.
It does. And the only solution that the Law Society seem to have is that fundamental human rights are somehow obvious and not something that society makes up. They're just inherent. And I think that's two things. First of all, I think it's deeply colonialist. All stems from the Magna Carta in England. I think it is deeply Western centric. And I also think it's wishful thinking. I don't think it's true throughout human society.
Yeah, and the fundamental human rights are not, we hold these things as obvious.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah.
When you look around the world. Now, Dave, would you like to be a lawyer? That's a question. Were you asked that in your final year of school?
Not in school, but I'd love to have been a lawyer. I really would. I just saw myself as Atticus Finch, and if people don't know who that is, then go and get educated. Yeah. But I was definitely. I would have loved to have been a lawyer. I'm a wannabe lawyer.
I could see you being a combative, contrarian lawyer. I could see that. Yeah. But you're going to Canberra. Speaking of combative and contrarian, to discuss all of this with a group of lawyers. What's that about?
I love going to Canberra, speaking to lawyers, and that's what we're going to do. It's going to be Thursday, a week today, and it'll be early in the morning in Canberra. There'll be details of it we'll put up. And we're just looking at this whole issue of education, law, and religion. I've been to Canberra, well, I'm pretty well now going there every month, and it's fascinating looking at the basis of law with lawyers. And I hope that if you are a lawyer, you'll feel free to join us.
So, Dave, wrap this up for us. What about the Bible? Where in the Bible would you go to say, this will be pull this thread and you'll start to understand law?
Okay, I was going to mention just a couple of verses in Proverbs, but Proverbs 8, but actually I'm going to say the whole chapter. I'm going to encourage people to go and read Proverbs 8. But it basically says, for law you need wisdom, and rulers need wisdom. And, lawyers need wisdom. In other words, law isn't just a case of, here's a set of rules. You actually need the wisdom to apply those rules in different situations. And I think that's what we all need. It's what our society needs. So I'm going to love you and leave you and go and prepare to go and speak to some lawyers. But I'm going to encourage people to defend the law, to speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves, ultimately to seek the lawgiver. And next week, we are going to look at, there's a program here called The Drum, and we're going to look at a lesson in apathy from The Drum. That doesn't sound that interesting, and I know you can't be bothered, but honestly, come along and next week and you'll see what we're talking about. Steve, great to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk, Dave. Have a good time in Canberra.